right. The boppy, happy music is there. Open intro. I'm Alan Levine from Open Education Global, and my job here is to get out of the way and welcome to this OEG live episode some really brilliant educator, teacher friends who are going to engage us in a fascinating conversation about this thing called AI, which I'm sure you have been reading about or hearing about. But also, we're doing this as part of MyFest, which is mid-year festival, and many of us are involved in this. So we're going to say hello to the MyFest audience. And again, I don't have a plan for how to do this, and so I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves, but they're all great people. I'm getting to meet Anna and Lance for the first time, but Mahabali, we've been friends for a long time. We've even hugged. It's so great to have you here. And I appreciate so much that you've been able to sort of be, really in many ways, what you do so often is sort of the link to so many people. So hello, Maha. How are you doing tonight?
I am good. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Mahabali at the American University in Cairo in Egypt. And I'm also one of the organizers of the Mid-Year Festival and the co-author of this paper that Anna, Lance, and I got together to do. And we'll talk to you a bit about the backstage of the writing of that paper, I hope, today as well.
That's great. And for those who are watching on the YouTube, we hope if you send in a message or comments in chat, we'll put them on the screen. And just again, so great to have everybody here. And then, of course, I'll say hello to Anna Mills. And I mean, we've crossed a little bit in the Twitters and the Connect space, and I really appreciate that. And you've been a power horse in terms of things. The writing across the curriculum database is just such a key resource. So welcome.
Good. Thank you.
Who are you and what do you do?
Thank you. I've been teaching at two-year colleges in the San Francisco Bay Area since 2005, teaching writing. And I wrote an OER textbook, How Arguments Work. And I've just been obsessed with and focusing on the AI in relation to writing instruction for the last year or so. So
excellent.
Yeah.
And writing is like the thing, that a lot of people are focused on, but we're going to go beyond writing, and really excited to welcome Lance. First time getting to talk, but I love your blog name, by the way. It's by any nerd, right? Is that
by any other nerd? Yes, thank you. I'm actually, tomorrow is my 2000th post since starting. Hey folks, I am Lansing. I am director, and my title just changed, so I have to remember it. Director of Faculty Development and Innovation at College Unbound in Providence, Rhode Island. And I, interested in instructional design and educational technology, and as this conversation started to arise, was just happened to be in some really rich conversations with folks like Autumn Keynes, Maha, Anna, many others that just got my brain working in ways that I thought could be helpful to the larger conversation.
And a thing that kind of is the connector here is this paper that came out, and I'll put the link on the stage, How to Respond to Generative AI in Education. And so can someone sort of tell, like, how did that come to be? Because this was kind of a merging of people through open channels, if I understand right.
Maha, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm trying. I think you started it.
Yeah.
I think Twitter. You DM'd me on Twitter.
Yeah. I was hoping to get to write something with you at some point, and we did some workshops on AI in January and February together, and so that kind of got the discussion going. And then, I think I sensed that I was going to learn a lot from you about open educational practices and about. But I was having this sense that we need to be using all the strengths of open as we deal with this sort of crisis / opportunity / disruption with AI, and that we could sort of find solace and a more of a hopeful orientation if we did that. And I did learn a huge amount from both of you as we as we got into the writing process. And then with Lance, I was just blown away by the way Lance was sharing the process of how he immediately collaborated with students starting in January, and set up an ongoing process for your institution, sort of already envisioning that we're going to need to keep changing, and we're going to need to review the policy and revise it and work with students throughout, and just that vision of an iterative process that was so open. So I was just delighted that both of you were willing to collaborate on writing this.
And I think like very early on when this exploded, Lance, you were sharing and you were curating policies from different institutions, and you were sharing that. And I was already using this in my institution to show people, here's what other people are doing. Anna, you were already curating stuff. That was one of the documents that I shared within my institution. I was blogging a lot about this, and that's how you knew I was thinking about this. We were tweeting around, so we get to know and we were tweeting those incomplete thoughts. I still remember, and Alan, you were in that conversation. I was like, oh, how do we cite when we work with AI? And I was like, can it be a co-author? And then I think it was you, Alan, who sent me the Nature, I think what they had decided about that. And so that kind of thing grows, and like to be willing to make yourself vulnerable, to say, I don't actually know how to do this, but here's what I'm thinking now. And maybe I'm wrong. And like one day later, okay, maybe I was wrong. So let's backtrack and do something else here. And to be sort of okay with that was, I think it's one of the reasons we were able to find each other. And like the workshops came out of, Anna was first like, let's write something. And then we meet to write the thing. And then we end up, she shows me something on ChatGPT. I'm like, hey, other people need to see this. Maybe we do a workshop. And the other elements that, I don't know if you all know this, but I gave the workshop with Anna, I think, before I gave any local workshops. And to me, this is a huge, being like vulnerable in the open is safer than doing something in my institution first before I've ever tried it on other people. So trying it with Anna, who I felt had a lot more experience as well, because it took me a while to get access to ChatGPT because it's blocked in Egypt. So so all of that that practice of recognizing, oh, people need a workshop first because the paper is going to take a while. Let's do it. We learn from that, and then it grows. But then when also Lance came into it, the kind of conversations we had in order to write this paper were in and of themselves like really generative, not generative like AI, but generative like human generative.
Yes. My whole paradigm shifted because I had been thinking, open licensing was sort of the core of what I was thinking was going to be useful. And it really shifted to open practices. And that included all the things we'd already been doing. I had been building this resource list that's just a Google Doc where people could comment and suggest resources. So it's crowdsourced, and it has a big caveat that, this is changing and I'm not necessarily an expert, and I'm just sharing what I'm sharing information, and let's do this together. And so that shift to open educational practices really allowed it to become much more inclusive of all the wonderful work that was already happening with people being vulnerable and trying to figure these things out in the open where it's somehow easier than at our institutions. Yeah.
I'll throw in there, like when Anna came to me, it was just like, hey, I'm working with Maha on this project, and do you want to be involved? I was like, hell yes. Like it was a very visceral, like, oh my gosh, this would be amazing, both because Anna and I had been in rich conversations, and also like so much of those, like the practices that I had, like Maha is a big inspiration on. Like I've been reading your work and going to different things that you've attended, and so like it was this interesting like extension, or like this is the way that open educational practices are really powerful, is that they continue to feed us back and forth in these interesting ways. And so I got really excited about that, and just the idea of like in that conversation of like, I feel like we probably could write like another 5 papers just based on like the kinds of conversations we were having, that we had to like unpack to just be able to focus on this. And it was, it's just been a hugely enriching project that like
we couldn't put it all in.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I do want to say something, if it's okay, Lance. Remember the first time, I think it was the first time we were meeting about it, And then you were like, and I'd love to give you guys feedback. I don't think I have anything to contribute. Like, what am I going to contribute in the midst of what you guys were doing? And I was like, Lance, you did this, this, and that. If you just write about that, that's a third of the paper. He's like, oh, yeah.
Fair.
Right. You
Fair.
had
Yeah, yeah.
created the policies, which was such a huge help to so many people and continues to be, putting the sample policies out there. That was the other huge thing, alongside the way you're collaborating with students and designing a process for the institution. Yeah.
Can you talk more about, Lance, about your project to work on policy? And Maha did this as well, with your students, because like the whole idea of developing policies is like chasing something that is moving as we speak, is kind of like almost counter possible.
I think it's I think for me, and this is some of what like I've continued to try to learn and speak to in the articles, like it's counter possible if we're not like leading with trust with our students. And that's not to like, and it's not like, it's not blind trust. It's not like, I'm not completely like, oh, you're like, if I just trust them, all the students are going to be perfect and blah, blah, blah. Like, no, but it is this, like, we talk about these ideas of like respect and trust, and we expect that from the students, but we don't actually demonstrate that in I say we, but like in many classrooms, that's not the starting place. I mean, you look at syllabi, and a lot of syllabi stuff comes from a place of non-trust. And so to me, knowing how complicated generative AI is going to be to the whole learning process, like in thinking about how we operate, particularly at College Unbound, it was really like, no, like we've got to do this together. We can't, and again, we also work with overwhelmingly adult students. Our average student is 37. And I don't know that I would do it. I don't know that I would do it differently, even if we had a more younger student body. I just know that was front and center, that like, it felt challenging to come at them and being like, we know what's best for you as adults, in wanting to really hear and understand what they were doing with it and how they were thinking about it, and have that actually reflect how we think about policy. Because, we have a significant portion of students who are multi-language learners. And so there's ways they're going to use that I think are valuable and helpful. That, as we've seen in some of the research around AI plagiarism detectors, like they are also the ones who are most likely to be wrongly accused of using AI. So like they have a stake in the conversation that I think is really important to be heard and the like. So I think it was a lot of those factors that led me to be like, what if we do it with the students? And like, we recognize this is going to continue to change, but at least if we're trying to center students, make them part of the conversation, it feels more aligned with our values in the ways we should be tackling technologies. And I'll just finally say, like, as a point, like this as a process at our institution, we're now recognizing as like, this is something we actually want to continue to do, not just with generative AI, but like with lots of different things. I've run these courses where it's both learning about and then like working towards developing institutional policy to, again, reinforce students as part of our community and not just the ones that like are subject to the guidance or the policies we put down.
Can you talk? I mean, I'm going to go back to the paper, but talk about this idea of educational shock that you introduce with, because that's a great setup for talking about how we respond to this. So where did that idea come from, and how would you describe it?
So this comes from Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategy. And so emergent strategy is there's a lot of biomimicry there. Like, so what do we learn from nature that's similar to social life, right? And so somewhere in her book, and she's citing someone else who we cite in the paper, if it's not her, but talking about the change comes either in shocks or slides. So it's either a huge shock like an earthquake, or it's a slide. It takes a while for something to happen, but you may not notice it as it happens. And so the pandemic and the whole AI thing were shocks. Like all of a sudden you have to react to this thing and you got to react. And then the slide takes slower and takes time. It's more... With a shock, you have to react, and maybe a knee-jerk reaction. You may forget about your intentions and goals, and we need to remind ourselves to really, what is it? Harness the shocks. What is it? She says there's something very specific, you know?
Yeah, I just put the
Put that
see if
in
I can get
somewhere.
this quote on here. Yeah, here it is. Harness the shock. Yeah.
Yeah, harness the shocks and direct the slide. So for me, like high flex was a slide. Like we slid into high flex and people were not very intentional as they did it. They were just doing it as a thing to in between being face-to-face and being fully online, for example. I don't know what the slide will be with AI, but it was definitely a shock. And I think when it's a shock, what happens is there isn't anybody in your immediate vicinity who knows what to do. It was the case for me anyway. And so going online then is where you find other people who don't know what to do either, but they're talking about it, and you start to find each other in ways that, the same with the pandemic, I think, again, a lot of people suddenly into remote teaching, even people who knew online learning, doing it for an entire institution for every single person everywhere was a completely different ballgame.
And I think that sense of shock and needing to respond quickly, and going to this larger community, sort of, to me, that connects with the what kind of a revelation it was to discover OER, because the sense with OER is that it's agile, it's still going to be useful. You doesn't have to be perfect because somebody else can then adapt it, or I can adapt it later. I'm out there and it has value without being perfect. And so to me, that was just an intuitive connection to the open movement and my experience writing an OER textbook. But then Maha helped us broaden that to see that all those conversations on social media and listservs were already part of that open response. And that was connected with the documents that were open licensed and the sharing that was happening and the crowdsourcing that was happening. And so, that's where the shock becomes an opportunity, and we sort of turn toward each other.
I'll add one piece we talked about at one point and never really made it into the article because I couldn't formulate it well, is like that idea of the shock, as we had talked about it, started to remind me of also Naomi Klein's shock doctrine, in which this concept of like when there is a shock to the system, it is also this opportunity often for powers to reassert themselves and in kind of pull back. And she talks about it in political ways of like rights and opportunities and resources, etc. In one of the ways I've been continuing to like toy with that in my head is, I think open ed practices felt like, and we talk about it as a shock absorber. I think it's been helpful in all of this like ongoing conversation and sharing of resources is also limited the degree to which AI plagiarism checkers are being fully endorsed by institutions. Like I've heard from a variety of folks that and to me, that would have been the shock doctrine of like, let's double down on surveillance technology. Let's make sure, like, let's create a bigger mousetrap, as the case may be. And so I think that was a piece that I couldn't quite get in there, but I feel like we're seeing right now, or at least I've seen in the last couple weeks, a variety of institutions stepping away from like Turnitin's AI plagiarism checker, as we talked about at the top of the hour. Even OpenAI's plagiarism checker has like, they've decided to like rescind that and stuff. So I thought that was really powerful. I think there's a question in the chat I'm supposed to answer.
They went by so quickly. Greg was asking, yeah.
Which was it?
How do you change institutional policies to include students informing policies, which is, you did through a class,
Yep.
and working out which tools to adapt across departments or campuses. So how do you go broader?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with, I benefit from being at a smaller campus. I am actually working with a couple other authors and colleagues where we actually did a workshop in March around developing institutional policy, around generative AI. And a lot of kind of that piece and what we did in that workshop is really thinking about how you collect cross-campus voices. So I think it does vary by campus, but I think trying to recognize or trying to figure out where you can do that, like where can the institution be able to take a course that can have input in some space. And you could, if it is a committee that decides a certain policy, then maybe that is like the final destination of the course that you teach, is the students are giving a demonstration or a presentation to that committee about policy recommendations and the like. So I think there's lots of creative ways to take it, but I think it will always be contextual to the way your campus is set up to navigate policy from the beginning.
So my institution, I think we did an ad hoc thing, but I can share it because I think you can still do it even if your institution doesn't normally do this. So with the AI specifically, so we had lots of conversations with faculty separately from workshops, and we had a big, for our symposium event where there was a panel of faculty, but students were in the audience and asked questions, and some of those were students in my digital literacies class. And then we got together with a group of the faculty to write the policy together, inspired by different ones in other institutions. We worked on a draft, we got feedback from faculty, and then we had a policy for faculty and a policy for students, both parallel ones. And we said, take the student one. So we didn't ask students to start from scratch, but we're like, here's a sample of something. Give us your feedback on what you keep, what you change, and so on. And so we asked faculty to ask their students. We did a survey for that. Now, none of the other faculty did it, but in my class, because we've been talking about AI the whole semester, I think it's important when we involve students in policy that we make sure that we've sort of laid a foundation. Same with faculty, really, because they didn't know a lot about AI again until we talked about it. Like, they can't set a policy until they know. And they gave feedback about that. One of the things I remember really well that came out of my class and my conversations with my students is that they wanted clarity on that if they used AI but didn't end up using it in the actual writing, do they have to disclose it? Yeah, it's right. If you use it to help you understand a reading by summarizing the reading, but you end up not copying that into any of your writing, you really don't need to disclose that. That doesn't sound like. And so they wanted clarity on that, so we clarified that. And we hadn't thought of it at all. So yes, I love Catherine Conrad's. Do you want to talk about that, Anna? I love
Yeah, this just came out. It's a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights for Education by Katie Conrad on the Critical AI Institute website. And I just love that there's a set of student rights and educator rights, and some of the rights are involved in having a voice in shaping policy and in influencing purchasing decisions about AI tools and detection tools. So I just think that's a really powerful statement that that we need to sort of look at our processes and hold them to certain standards around this, rather than just kind of letting it all unfold willy-nilly. And I was going to add in a bit about social annotation. I'm thinking about, usually I have students annotate my syllabus, inspired by the Remy Collier's syllabus annotation project, using a social annotation, collaborative annotation tool like Hypothesis or Perusal. And so I was going to do that again, which would include annotating the AI policy. But then I was going to say to students, we can change this. So let's see what you think of it. And this is what I'm putting out there, but it's very much subject to change. And I want to hear what you think. And so maybe consider actually changing that syllabus kind of within the first week, depending on their discussion. I usually have an open discussion about community agreements for the class. And so I thought that AI use could become part of that community agreement discussion. But I also would go that route of sort of giving them something to start with and reflect on, as opposed to just come up with it out of the blue. Because that critical AI literacy kind of education then is going to be the basis for reflecting on and forming that policy. And that's what's so cool about Lance's model, that you had a course where they could be learning that as they develop the policy.
And that was like, it was such an interesting experience of like they both like they're learning both about the tool, they're learning about, you know, policy and crafting, what, you know, what that means, what that looks like, investing in their like in the institution's growth and development. And so just like it was really exciting. And also, like, there's probably about 3 or 4 of them now who were still meeting weekly, both to like finish up the policy and get it implemented, and to do some like writing and presenting as well. But I wanted to go back to Maha's point about there was really we saw those questions in with my students as well. Like, one of my students like said it so beautifully, was like, they know organization is not one of their strong suits, and like they'll take a bunch of notes and then they're trying to figure out like what to do with it, and they took the notes and they put it into ChatGPT and said like, organize this, and that helped them then go write, you know, what they were going to write. But like that became a really good edge case of like, do you cite that or not? Like in that these are the things that like students, everybody's gonna use this in different ways, and if we are only looking through it through like that classroom lens, or in that very like how to use it right, then we're missing, you know, how to use it right in the classroom. We're missing these other spaces that could also be really helpful for other students to learn or to know about. Like, create here's ways that would really help some students more than others.
I'm thinking too, like, speaking of shock, it seems like everything we're doing has to react to something these large companies or other people are doing, and they're like coming quickly into either our workflow or the way we communicate. I'm thinking too, Lance, what you're talking about in terms of the organizing notes. I mean, it's going to be part of our writing, like, tools. Like, it's going to be in there, and so it's going to be less of like, oh, I went over the ChatGPT and did it. No, I'm doing this from my search engine or from my Google Docs. And so that just gets very much more mixed in terms of what we're talking about as what is writing. But just think about, like, how does it feel to constantly be saying to have to react to these things that are coming down, as whether they're slide or shock?
But this is like Adrienne Marie Brown talks about intentional adaptation. So similar to, I mean, you're talking about doubling down on surveillance, Lance, earlier, and the detection. Same with the pandemic, doubling down on proctoring, right? But we need to center what our values are and then question whether these decisions help us meet our values or not. And a guy was asking in the chat about, like, how do you do something like a Bill of Rights if you're a top-down organization? And I understand that. And a lot of times IT and admin make decisions without consulting faculty or consulting faculty developers or consulting anyone who really knows anything about anything. But I think there's also an element of continuing to speak back, even if they have taken decisions without your base. So, for example, I think it was in our institution, Blackboard decided to give us Respondus for free during the pandemic. So who's going to say no to that, right? But so we couldn't stop that. But we did talk to the provost about the harms of it. I talked to my students about the harms of it. My students went and talked to their department chairs about the harms of it. So some departments banned it. And then in our workshops, we would say use it as a very, very last resort when you really, really, really cannot do anything else at all. These are all the problems with it. These are the harms. So, you know, just because someone took a decision doesn't mean you can't continue to resist it at whatever level you can. And I think there's also one of the things that happened for us during the pandemic is, like, equity and care are always central to my work. But a lot of times talking to people within my institution was like, what's she talking about? And then the pandemic happened, like, oh yeah, that care stuff, we need to do that now. So I think we need to have a lot of patience within institutions to build allyships over time, so that when those shocks come, there are others who can help us remember what our values are and how are we going to react to this. So even if someone more powerful than us has taken a decision we don't agree with, how can we still continue to resist it at whatever level we can? But to just say, oh, someone took that decision, it's out of my hands now. No, you can still do something about it. You know, it might not be all the way. Maybe next time someone will listen to you. Maybe, I don't know, maybe keep talking about it, and next time more people will be resistant to that kind of thing. And also sometimes try to understand why they took it and maybe work earlier, you know, like, how did we get here in the first place?
Yeah. God, there's so many channels of communication. This is fabulous and exactly what we wanted. I'm thinking, like, Obviously, of course, you three have been very immersed in this and have been tapped in this. Like, again, for the faculty who are, obviously they're hearing of this, and like, again, the suggestions for people just trying to like, where do they start from where they are now to try to be ready to face or address or incorporate, like what are some of the basic steps? And you do outline some broad ones in the article. I'm just thinking about like in your work now in your institution or in the people who you're hearing from, and they're coming to say, what do I do? Where do I go? Like, what's the magic like link that I can click that will help me understand all this? But what are your general suggestions for faculty who are trying to get their heads around this?
Oh, well, there's a lot of support out there. Is one big message that I feel heartened by, that working on the paper really drove home, because I could see not just, the amazing things that Maha and Lance were doing. And I wasn't just in my little corner thinking about how to grow my resource list. But then looking outward to these other projects and just the volume of support and free professional development and crowdsourced resources. Because I think, when I talked with the departments that I'm connected with, they were sort of at a place of like, where do we even start to form a policy? And it's like, well, there's a lot of help for that. It's okay, because you don't have to start from scratch. And just seeing that groundswell of projects and support and discussion, and kind of listing those out in the paper, from the 101 Ideas for AI in Education project from Chrissy Naranci and Sandra Beglin and Antonio Arboleda and Mariana Carrazzior. And the Daniel Stanford's AI in Education listserv, and Laura Duman's Facebook AI in Higher Education community space, were just like a few of all those places that people are going and just asking for help and getting help. So I feel like, getting past that isolation at the institutional level, or even the individual, what do I do with my syllabus level, makes it possible to move forward. Because I think a lot of people want to go past, there's the academic integrity concern, but I'm hearing like more and more people want to sort of pivot away from that into the, how do we work with it? How do we use it pedagogically? I don't want to just be banning it. I want to be kind of moving forward with it and be excited by it. But there's still all these questions about, well, what does that look like in practice? I still need to know what my students are doing and saying in order to assess their learning. I need to know what's theirs and what's AI and separate those. But, I think, I'll stop there. Maybe Maha and Lance have some more concrete suggestions.
I mean, I think a few things of like, I think the first I keep going to with faculty is like it sounds weird, but there's always the first step of just like acknowledging that this feels like an existential blow. It doesn't necessarily, for many, it may not be. I think for a lot they are. And one of my best friends and colleagues like really helped me understand this in just like a very thoughtful and like amazing teacher, and has been working for decades to like hone the work in teaching and learning that she's doing in the classroom. And so much of it, resulted in these products that are written or like have teaches a history course, things that can be now done through generative AI. And so like there is this like serious moment of just like 20 years in after the pandemic of like, now I've got to restart again. Like I have to rethink everything. So like there's always the first, just take your own temperature on that. Take your own sense of like, how are you really feeling about this? Never mind the students, but like, how is this really infecting, or what do you feel worried about in terms of how you teach, how you create a learning experience, etc. if you're taking small steps, it's just acknowledging it and acknowledging the uncertainty. Like, you're trying to figure out the semester. And I know that's, there's a couple colleagues that, like, we joked, like, they were like, I'm just going with my head down during the spring. Like, I don't have any more space for this. And then towards the fall, they're saying, like, okay, like, my first step is just acknowledging it. Like, I'm not going to solve this in a semester. It's going to take a while, and it's going to keep changing. So there's like the kind of working with that flow and not try, or that flow and not trying to work against it. And then the thing that's like really hard and tricky, but again, it's one of those individually people are gonna instructors are gonna have to figure this out, is like, what I don't like this expression, but it feels so right, of like, what are the darlings that you want to kill, like, or that you may have to be done with. And this is, people make these comparisons to the calculator's impact on math. And I don't think that's holistically true, but I do think there's going to be some calculators that you thought were essential, and others that, like, this is taking the place of that. And we're really not going to know this for years to come, but like, there's all these like assumptions we have about what we have in our syllabus and how that's the important thing. But then there's this sublayer of all the other things that are like connected to that we never explicitly say. And so I think there are those things that individually people have to sit with, and then at that point, like, start to go out and find the things that feel right for them through these different resources that are out there. Like, I continue to be impressed with, the amount of people sharing and talking about this. People have different takes, but I think some of the work Ethan Mollick is doing, I think just very publicly sharing, and he's been doing some really good stuff with like showing these different ways of assessment. And it's sometimes assessment in ways that don't feel quite the same to the way I would do it, but it's still, these are different flavors that are out there. And I think it's that, like, once you do that inner work, I think some of the outer work becomes a little more easier to do, but it's not something I can like generally advise or like be like, this is the step that you take, because we're talking about, dozens, if not 100, 200 disciplines with very different approaches and standards and things like that.
And speaking of that, Lance, I think one of the things that was driving some people crazy is like, why can't you just give us a policy for all of us? And we're like, because you teach different things at different levels, and we really have to differentiate between people who teach writing, where that's their bread and butter, and people who teach something else. And before we went live, I was talking about, I think it's really important for teachers not to feel threatened that they're going to lose their jobs, because I think that kind of discourse is really problematic and harmful. And also just that the sum total of education is not the writing. I know that a lot of the artifacts of learning look like writing, but the actual learning that happens in other places, and we write them. and it's part of that reimagination of, okay, how can we make sure that learning is happening before it gets represented in this writing that ChatGPT could do parts of? Is again a different question for every discipline, for every course, and thinking about it, and it's exhausting because everybody's burnt out from before, and that's important to recognize. Like, it's a lot to ask people to keep doing, and like you're saying, Lance, like, if they don't recognize it, it's still happening. I remember there were faculty last semester who'd say, so I'm not going to mention AI to my students because I don't want to give them any ideas. Like, they already have ideas, they just want to know what you think.
And they know you don't have any if you're saying that.
No,
right?
a month later, he's like, so this is your assignment. They're like, oh, we can do that in ChatGPT. He's like, oh, like, oops.
Mm-hmm.
But it's I'm laughing, but it's not fun. It didn't feel funny to them, obviously. I mean, we laugh about it, but it's a lot of rethinking what we do.
Yeah, and I think like one of the things that came out of the paper was recommending at the end that we validate and recognize the practices we're already doing that help us to respond to AI. So whether that's the kind of social media sharing that we're doing, recognizing that as an important part of our teaching practice. But also, some of the responses to the academic integrity issue are things that are already good practices for assigning writing that we already might want to do more of. So conferencing with students and assigning the writing process and talking with students about, how writing helps us learn to think, and having students reflect on what they're getting out of the writing process. All of those things, would help to deter misuse of AI and help students sort of see the intrinsic value of what they're doing. So recognizing if we're already doing that, that's helping us respond to AI. If that's something we want to do a little more of, that's part of our response to AI, sort of recognizing the things that we can do, want to do for other reasons, as constructive, recognizing that rather than focusing on everything that we can't do right now, helps to deal with the overwhelm. And I see these discussions about how is AI different from other statistical tools. And I love that response about, it's, there's not much temptation to see other tools as sentient. So part of the reason we need to focus on AI is because of that temptation, that ELIZA effect that we tend to project on it. And we've got to incorporate the critical AI literacy as part of digital literacy, partly to guard against that and help students develop those tools to be skeptical of it, but partly just because it has this capacity to seem human-like that other tools have not had. It's passing the Turing test.
And even like when we talk about AI like it's one thing is also somewhat problematic, because it's not. And a lot of times it's based upon, I did this with Chat GPT, or I created an image with Midjourney. That's AI. And it's so vast. I think it's problematic to talk about it as a single thing. But I do respect you, Jonathan, because we had these conversations early where he's saying like, and it's a reminder of Emily Bender's work of the stochastic parrot, that really it's randomness that this stuff is creating. But I think when we start talking about it is, well, ChatGPT said, or ChatGPT hallucinates, and we've kind of slipped down into this assigning some human characteristics to something that's not human.
Anna and I are collaborating with Anuj Gupta and Yasir Temer on a paper about metaphors for AI and what they kind of imply about our values and how harmful they may be, how helpful they may be. There's other people who've written about metaphors in AI as well. So that kind of like that's I think a really important thing to recognize, is how we see it and what we compare it to influences how we respond to it. It becomes entangled in our vision of what it is. I did want to say something else, but I've forgotten what it is. So I'm going to
yeah. Ask ChatGPT what you should say. No.
Oh, now I remember. I remember what I wanted to say. I wanted to say that the one I'm really scared about is the deep fakes becoming so easy with voice and video, and being able to trick someone to believing that a real person that we know has said or done something different. This has existed for a while, but I think it needed a large data set at first. So it had to be like big celebrities like Trump. But now it seems to be a lot easier. And besides, there's, a lot of educators, for example, especially have a lot of video or audio files all over the internet. And that relates to also open education, because the more open we are, the more of that kind of material exists about us, and the easier it is for someone to just pull that. And I know there are probably laws against it, but then laws don't usually stop people from doing things until after they've done them,
Yeah. I mean, catfishing seems kind of quaint now. not that it ever was, but what it's capable of is a little bit mind-boggling.
And you suffered from that because you had a lot of photos online, right?
Yeah, but another thing that I've been thinking about is like the idea about detection is like drawing this line between human writing or human creation and machine. And I mean, when I hear and read about what you're doing, is like it's becoming a lot more mixed. So what happens when AI content that gets like Lance is saying, we use it to help create like summarization of our notes, which we take as individuals, but it's going to get much more mixed. And this idea about, this is 30% AI, like it doesn't really work. And so it's just an interesting future to think about. It's not this like either or situation not long down the line. And so how do we deal with that?
I've been thinking about that a lot because I've taken these public stances supporting labeling of AI text, and I know that it's going in a hybrid direction. Even when I have worked with it myself on my writing, I find like, oh, well, those 4 words were from the AI, but I'm getting into these gray areas where there are going to be more and more gray areas, and even acknowledging that, though, I don't want to give up too soon on the labeling, because I do think there comes a point where you've got 3 paragraphs in a row where all the word sequences were put together by ChatGPT. That needs to be labeled. And there are cases where I want to know that, and I want to preserve a space for words representing a human interaction and facilitating a relationship. And there are times where I don't want to spend my time responding to, a classmate's discussion post that was generated by ChatGPT, because that's not really helping me build community in the class. There are times where I want to preserve a space for the human in a verbal communication. And I think that we can find ways to do that, even allowing for gray areas and imperfections. I think there are lots of ways, not just detection tools or watermarking, but ways to incorporate version history within the user interface, or to have the companies keep a record of what has been generated. I mean, we've only really begun to look at the options and the pros and cons of each option. And the value of coming back to those values around writing as human communication within the context of relationship. I mean, that's what I talk to my students about, is that, we're joining a conversation, and we're connecting, we're speaking to audiences, and want to preserve that vision and create spaces for that.
Yeah. And Sarah Elaine Eden talks about a post-plagiarism era where she says we won't know where the human ends and the machine begins. But I think for now, one of the things that I was saying into it, I agree with Anna on this, and I also have an additional point here. So when we say we want to differentiate what students have written or what scholars have written and what the AI has written, that's one element of just knowing where this is coming from. But I'm concerned about something else. Whatever the AI is telling you, whatever ChatGPT is telling you, it comes from a synthesis of other stuff. But if you asked something, so this was a very particular one, I asked about what are the elements of white supremacy culture? And it gave me a list of things. But this list of things, this is Tema Okun and Kenneth Jones' work. This is nobody else's work. It's these 2 people's work, but ChatGPT doesn't tell you that. So when I tell it, where did you get that from? She's like, I don't know. But if you ask ChatGPT, who are the people who write about white supremacy culture? Oh yeah, Tema Okun and Kenneth Jones, right? So this is another element of where it's not actually enough that the student will take something and say, oh, well, ChatGPT said this. Actually, no, ChatGPT didn't really say this. It wrote this. It did what students do when they paraphrase without citing. And now we're telling them that's okay to cite that, but not find out where this come from. And of course, if it's academic work, whether it's a scholar or a student doing it, it's not summarizing my own writing, it's getting something from somewhere else. Then actually, you should really figure out where it's really coming from. And so I don't think we should be stopping at this, unless it's like just really creative type of work where we're just making things up, there's a lot of stuff that we can do with AI that doesn't need to do that, and that's fine. And I think it's contextual as to whether and when this becomes important, but we need to keep having these conversations about, is it really okay to just say that this is what ChatGPT gave me and then I've done what I need to do? And I think that's not, a lot of times, that's not due diligence for scholarship or education.
Yeah, and that really connects to a question of also around values. Are there academic values that we have around citing sources that we need to speak up about in the public sphere, as society is looking at AI regulation and who's making decisions about how these systems work and how they cite or don't cite sources and use copyrighted material. So, I mean, I think that we have an important role to play in that discussion as educators and coming from academia. to send that message about transparency and the rights of authors whose text is used in the training.
Right, +1 to everything that's being said here. Like, where my mind is going right now within this conversation ties into my research. It's so right now OpenAI is being sued by Sarah Silverman and a bunch of other authors who are saying that OpenAI used platforms like Sci-Hub and LibGen to help create their large language models. Sci-Hub and LibGen are academic pirate networks. And how this is all coming together in my head is that, like, we have this vast academic pirate network, not just Sci-Hub and LibGen, but many others, that all exist because so much of the knowledge that academia produces gets put behind paywalls. And so there's also this interesting question at the center of even what we're talking about, of the importance of open education, open access, that we're both feeding the machine, as we kind of noted before, and also we're stuck in this situation where, I mean, there's going to be, for some, like, ChatGPT may be the only way to get access to research literature, because even if you're using the advanced version, which is $20 a month, that is still cheaper than just one article on almost any journal platform. So that there's an interesting, like, very complex web there that just this conversation helped generate in me to, like, recognize how these things fit together in my head as well.
Wow, we're just getting started here, folks. What do you think we're like? I don't know, forecast like 6 months from now. What do you think we're going to be seeing? It's a crazy question, but I just think about, like, 6 months ago, we were just like, ChatGPT was just sort of emerging, and it's been out a while, but, like, what is going to be on our plates and our conversations in the future?
Well, it does look like we may see some form of regulation. So there's that. And then we're also seeing the move toward integration with Google Docs and Word. And sort of these AI capacities are going to be within the apps that students are using to do their schoolwork. And so it's going to be, harder to draw that line unless we have regulation or user interfaces that facilitate some kind of labeling of what's AI and what's not. So I think, it's going to be more ubiquitous, and hopefully that societal conversation about how we want to shape it and who's making the decisions and what are the expectations and what are the guardrails will be further along. And so that's what we've got to make happen, I think.
I think in the next 6 months we will I think we'll see an enterprise version of AI that is integratable into institutional systems, and I think there's going to be some strong interest in that, and it's also going to create its own level of chaos, because once we start training on internal systems, training an AI tool on internal systems, I think there's a lot of possibilities and a lot of problems that brings up, that I think it'll be another type of disruption, and raise questions we're aren't even thinking about today.
Are you talking about, like, how Blackboard is integrating AI? So you're saying, like, the LMS will have AI within it?
But, well, I'm thinking like Blackboard. I'm thinking student information systems. I'm thinking, alumni. Like, when I start to think about all the different, one of the things we are going to write this at some point. We have not written this yet, but me and my good friend Danielle Leek want to write this article, or this, like, story about how a piece of data enters into a higher educational system, in all the ways it gets fractured and cut up and moved and copied and pasted across all the different systems. And I'm just, as we were doing that, like we're tracing out all these different systems, everything from like the card key for, to access different rooms on certain physical campuses. Like once you have an enterprise model that can work in or across those systems, I think there's going to be another set of like lots of different things that start to, that institutions are starting to play with or needing to really think through the implications of.
In terms of the surveillance economy.
I'm not very good at predicting the future.
Who is?
I do think that a lot of ed tech hyperbole dies down and becomes somewhere different than where it started. So thinking about MOOCs in 2012, and I think, and where they are now, there's still something new that happened. There's still something that's not horrible. It has some problems and has a lot of great stuff and all that. I think that's eventually where we're going to go. I don't know if it's going to take 6 months or a bit longer, because I think it's, with the AI, it's changing so quickly. I think that was not happening with things like MOOCs. But I think if using it becomes more ubiquitous, like it's there in the tools that you use without you sort of consenting or recognizing that you're using things like that, then it will affect, I think, the way we do things. Eventually. We need to keep trying not to forget for a while until it becomes impossible, I think, because all the ways in which it can influence you to think in very particular ways, in the same way that Google shows you particular things and Wikipedia keeps particular things and YouTube recommends particular things, then the more of that kind of AI we have in our lives, the less control we have over what we're thinking and what we're doing. And we need to be really, really aware of that, and especially of the epistemic injustice of whose ideas were fed into these spaces and what kind of ideas is it perpetuating, what kind of injustice is it reproducing, in all of those kinds of AIs that we know historically have always been biased in some way or another. So.
Okay, before we end on a lot of doom, like let's talk about something small, like farting cats and everything, all the metaphors that we've heard aside. Like, what is something that you've seen like in your journeys that said, wow, that's actually quite useful, or that was inspiring, or maybe just something that maybe a student did that said, I need to adjust my thinking on this, and it's not all doom and gloom.
Well, I think translation and the benefits of sort of opening up access to languages of power. It's problematic that it reinforces those languages, but it also is very useful for my students who are learning English and suddenly have a way to get this level of assistance that just would not be possible. And that's helping them learn, and it's helping them get past these sort of barriers of the power structure. And I think translation can do that as well, machine translation.
I'll just go with an extension of that is, I think the cover letter is the most obnoxious piece of writing ever. It is extremely rhetorically narrow and has all these expectations that like you have to do all of these things, most of which have nothing to do with the job that you're applying for. And so there's ways I feel like, and again, as Anna said, it's a double-edged sword, but like the fact that people could now easily generate a cover letter that feels reflective of them and do those rhetorical steps and not have to like spend all this extra energy just to like humble themselves to apply, like in the application process. There's just something really powerful about that as a like a master code switcher, and I say that in very like recognizing the loaded language there. I think the other thing that I really find powerful is I watch my partner use it a lot to really like I have to write to figure out what I need to write to figure out what I'm thinking. Like I've just grown into that space as given my life and the whatnot. But she is more of a conversationalist, and she has been using it a lot for that conversation as she's trying to figure out different projects or different things that she's working on. And so to see her get so like move so much more quickly as she's like generating and having these conversations is also something I think is really powerful. It's like having somebody you can continually iterate with constantly. That's been really powerful for me to see.
I'm just going to mention really quickly this tool called Aomni. I don't know how to pronounce it, AOMNI.com, because what it does is it doesn't generate content sort of randomly in the way ChatGPT does. It does an actual web search. It's a bit slower. It does an actual web search, and it finds sources that are pretty good sources, and then it synthesizes from these sources and sort of does a literature review for you, which I think is a really useful thing. I think it's okay to start using things like that and then dig deeper later by selecting these sources. But I like it because it's credible. It doesn't just make things up out of nowhere. It just does it differently, but it does help provide a summarized everything of what would have taken me like an hour to do. It will do with very similar sources in like 10 minutes. So not like this, but 10 minutes, still good.
Wow. I hate to cut this off, but we're at top of the hour and it's been a lively conversation. I really want to thank you, Maha and Anna and Lance for joining in for an unstructured conversation. Again, I really hope everybody reads the paper, and I think we should jump in and annotate it because...
That would be fantastic. It's posted as a PDF. Can we annotate it?
Yeah, you can do that on a PDF. Hypothesis does that.
Awesome.
So thanks again. The conversations, they're ongoing everywhere in all the places. There's a lot going on at MyFest. We didn't even get to talk about the great sessions that's been going on there. And thanks to everybody who tuned into this live broadcast, and mostly thanks to Maha, Anna, and Lance for being part of this. And like, I just asked them and they said yes. And so that's how this open network stuff works.
Thanks for inviting us. What better place to get to share our paper? It's really wonderful.
And I'm going to exit with our little outro music and fade out and say goodbye to everybody who watched and participated, and let's chat again.